Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on day 2 of Next. Really excited to have you here to talk about how startups are innovating with G Suite. I'm Jenn Bi, and I'm part of the G Suite product marketing team, and I'm joined by 3 incredible leaders of startups that have grown immensely in the past couple of years. I have Karl Sun, CEO and co-founder at Lucidchart. I have Zander, head of IT at HackerOne. And I have Bryan Helmig, CTO and co-founder at Zander. So thank you so much for being here. Today, what are we going to talk about? We're going to discuss how these 3 startups have grown incredibly. They've scaled their teams, and they're really thinking ahead about the way we work. We're going to get a behind-the-scenes look of how they are empowering their teams to work faster and smarter than ever before. So really excited to dig in. We are going to leave time at the end for Q&A. There's actually mics in the middle of the seats, so you can stand up, definitely go to the mic, share your question, and we'll get to it at the end. So keep that in the back of your mind. Let's start off with a quick round of introductions. Karl, why don't you start us off? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and if you can, repeat who you are so the audience can know.
Great. So my name is Karl, so I'm the co-founder and CEO at Lucidchart. And Lucidchart is a visual workspace that brings together diagramming with data visualization and collaboration so that people can innovate and work faster. And I think one of the things you asked about was my history with startups. And in my previous career, I had worked and been advisor, actually a lawyer to startups. But then I actually was at this startup called Google back in the day, and that was actually part of the inspiration for Lucidchart, because we were obviously using G Suite before it was called G Suite back internally, and I drank the Kool-Aid pretty early about this idea of collaboration. And so when I met my co-founder, Ben, who's our CTO and technical founder, I was actually amazed at the graphical application that he had built, this new idea of delivering software through the cloud with a focus on collaboration. And that's how we got started.
I'm Zander. I run IT at HackerOne. I am addicted to companies that grow really quickly. The last 3 companies we've been at have all been like rapid growth companies. I scaled a company from about 400 to 1,100 people in about 18 months, and back down 250 people less than that. And then at HackerOne, I've been here since we were 60 people. We're 240, and that's over about 18 months. And HackerOne is a special kind of startup where normally when you're growing, you're worrying about short-term goals, and we got to get this application, we have to do this thing, we have to solve this goal. But we're a security company on top of that, which means that everything that we do has a security focus on top of it, and we rely on tools like G Suite and identity providers and stuff like Okta to be able to do everything that we do incredibly securely at the same time. And it's crazy, because we're always buying, I always joke with all of our salespeople that we buy at an enterprise level, but at like 200 people. So we're always paying way too much for software, but it's good. And HackerOne, we provide bug bounty services for companies across the world, from the smallest companies to the largest, that allow them to interact with white hat hackers and deal with their most insane security issues that they could possibly have in a secure way, and also do secure payouts all across the world and every kind of currency and cryptocurrency and whatever they want to do.
I'm Bryan. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO of Zander. And Zander is about 200-ish, 210 people. And we've been using G Suite for forever. But what Zander does is we're an automation platform. So we help people build workflows and automation, usually with SaaS software. You can throw some custom stuff in there. G Suite's a common one, so you want to trigger on a new row or add a row or have some logic off of that and update a lead or send a text message or send an email. And you can kind of build these complex multi-step things without involving an engineer, which is really helpful. So it helps people be more productive and operate quicker with fewer resources. So that's what we do.
Amazing. Thanks for those introductions. So what better way to get us started in this session than to talk about the beginnings of these startups? This is usually my favorite topic. I love hearing about the early days of how these things got off the ground. Can you share a little bit, each of you, how you really got from step 0 to step 1? When you had a blank slate in front of you, how did you build and establish a work culture? Because that's sometimes very difficult. Bryan, why don't you actually kick us off? I know that you co-founded Zapier in 2011, and you really actually had a unique take on establishing a work culture, so maybe you can share a little bit with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And something you may not know about Zapier is that we're 100% remote, so we have no office. We don't have a central or distributed office or anything. All 200 plus people just work from their home office or wherever they are most productive. And as you can imagine, our office is whatever web app we're collaborating on. So for us, Google Suite is a huge one. I can't say how many things happen over spreadsheets and slides and docs, tons of that, but also chat apps like Slack we're often using as our core office. So in the early days, figuring out how we work together was very much just figuring out how to work together through software, which is a good underpinning for what we obviously do. We do a lot of automation stuff when you live in it. There's so many little robots running around Zapier doing stuff, pulling things out of spreadsheets and uploading this and reacting to things. And that's really what drove us to develop kind of our culture around how we work. We have a couple values that we try to adhere to that don't feel like posters on a wall. They're things you can actually do. So we have a very default to action value where we'd rather you make a mistake and move forward than get stuck, because since we're so remote, time zone's a big thing, and if you're waiting for the answer, it might be a whole spin of the earth away, and that's not an effective latency for that sort of stuff. So what we try to do is just use the tools we have to work online in a highly available sort of way, and just help people unblock themselves, kind of keep going.
Yeah, Karl, why don't you share also a little bit about your early days at Lucidchart? I think it'd be really interesting to hear, especially when you're coming from a bigger company to a smaller company, and just bring us back to those early days. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think one of the inspirations for starting the company was just coming from Google and this idea of seeing collaboration and how that could make us more effective. And then I met my co-founder Ben, who had built an early version of Lucidchart, our product already. And it's interesting because in some sense Lucidchart is we grew up at the antithesis of Zapier, because we've always been in one place. We've always been together. We're only now branching out. We opened our first office in Europe, in Amsterdam, and so we're actually, and now we've gotten larger, and so the engineering and product team are in a separate building, and so we're learning how to work remotely better. It is key, I think, regardless of which phase you're at, having the right tools that allow you to work most effectively. And even in the, we're all together environment, I think collaboration tools are still critical, because I go back to my Google days, one of the main use cases back when I was at Google, and one of the core use cases even today is just very simple things like Google Docs, right? It's the ideal mechanism for us to all gather our thoughts and take notes, in a meeting, right? We may have, we have a staff meeting that has gotten actually rather large. So there's a lot of people in it, but you keep the agenda and the notes in there, and everyone can add to it. My one-on-one meetings, it's a history of what's going on, and I always know where to access it. I always, we can always add things to it, and it's sort of a placeholder. So, those are some of the things in terms of culture. I mean, I think, as you're smaller, the culture is a reflection, I think, of the people that you have on board. And over time, once you get to a size where not everyone knows each other and what they're all doing, it starts to evolve, and you have to be a little bit more deliberate about it, and that's something we've tried to do. But
so I think I'm at a disadvantage. You guys both founded companies, and I just joined late. We started in a very interesting way, where we kind of had two of our, we call them our senior co-founders. They were both lifelong friends in Groningen in the Netherlands, and they were working together as pen testers and working for companies like Google and Facebook, and helping them find these vulnerabilities and trying to figure out ways to disclose them to other companies that maybe didn't ask them for help. in safe ways. And they, our junior co-founder, Alex Rice, was on sabbatical from Facebook and went to the Netherlands to hang out and realized that this thing that they were trying to do was a really good company. And so they all kind of came together and built it. And they had all seen how culture affected these larger companies and really wanted to make sure that in the same kind of way that you're talking about, if you're asynchronous, and we started off asynchronous very early, that when you have an issue, you just feel like you can be empowered. So we have values like act like an owner, right? Like you don't necessarily own the entire company, but if you think this is the right thing to do, even from the smallest thing like cleaning up a plate because someone else left it instead of blaming it, all the way up to like, okay, this thing just needs to get fixed and we need to get this done now, we're gonna do it. We empower people to do that. And we use tools like G Suite and Gmail, especially early on, and Slack, and basically everything else that are collaborative, because we like that history, we like that online ability. And when I was talking to our founders originally, like why did we pick G Suite? I mean, it's pretty obvious. It's the best thing out there. But we were apparently originally, like when we were really small, using like an Exchange, like our self-hosted email server, not even Exchange, like an email server. And Alex Rice came in, he's like, all right, we're changing two things. We're not using our self-hosted Git repository, we're moving to Fabricator, and we're moving to G Suite. And when people ask why, it's like, you don't want to grow with things that you built yourself like this. It just won't work. And you know, when you get really large and you're trying to find a tool that fits a very, very specific niche, like at that time you can kind of look at building things. But when you're small and you're just trying to be agile, it's hard to want to think about building something that can compete with all the features in a G Suite and all the features that are out there for these existing tools that empower you to be distributed or working from wherever or all in one office, but all just trying to keep growing at the speed of light.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I did want to shift the conversation to be about how the three of you were able to grow your companies and teams so rapidly. I do want to understand a little bit about who is in the audience today. So if you are part of a startup or a small business, or if you plan to start a company at any point in your career, can you just raise your hand and we can get a show of hands? Yeah, so looks like a majority of the room. So I think this is a pretty relevant topic. You know, we were just talking right before this session, Karl, that Lucidchart was 250 employees maybe 2 years ago. You know, HackerOne is planning to add in maybe another 80 to 100 employees this year, like similar for Zapier. So we're talking about incredible rates of growth. And going through these inflection points, how do you think work has really evolved from when you were a small team of 15, 20, even 50 people to now being in the hundreds and going up? Is the way that you work now very different from what it was in the past? Anyone want to kick us off?
I mean, I can. For us, we've tried to be kind of intentional about how we work, and from the very beginning, you know, one of the things that we've recently added is just being more explicit about how we communicate or how we like bubble up. And we were just chatting about this a little bit before about what we call raising the bandwidth. This is like a thing that you just see these happen, like in Slack, the thread goes to like, the count is like 180 replies. And it's like, all right, we need to stop doing that and just get on a call and hop on a video call, a Hangout or a Zoom call or whatever, and really hash this out and figure out what we want, and then report back what we figured out in there so we can kind of close the loop. And that's something we had done like just on ad hoc before, but we never had like been explicit about that. So as we've gotten bigger, now instead of it just being a thing everyone knew to do just naturally when you were 20, 30, 40 people, because you always saw people doing it, is now something you have to explicitly say, like as a general rule, like if you have a thread with more than 50 replies in it, you should just go to a video call, right? Like is a really helpful like foundational rule that we didn't need before, but now we need a little more of that explicitness. So that's been, you know, a tangible thing that we've like added in as we've learned more.
Yeah, I think, so I've grown a lot of companies in different ways, and I think the thing that I've learned is you kind of, exactly what you're saying, you kind of have to sometimes codify these beliefs that when you're small, everyone just understands. But as you bring in more people, we all strive to bring in diverse hires. And that diversity goes into a lot of ways. Like you can talk about ethnicity and background and gender, but it's also about like where you've worked. Like we all haven't worked at the same company, and when you bring in other people who have their own experiences, their own backgrounds, you have to make sure that either the barrier to entry to understanding what you're doing is low. Like we have a very, very explicit weekly AMA that's anyone can ask anyone a question. And that means that an intern can ask our CEO, why did we make this business decision? Or what happened at the board meeting? And that's totally okay. But what we found is as we grew very quickly, people weren't always as willing to answer those questions because they had come from places that weren't as accepting and open. So when they wanted to ask a hard question, there was the fear of retaliation or the fear of a fake answer. And I'm actually not sure which one of those two things is worse. But we don't have that issue. The issue is people came in with that predefined belief. And that same thing goes into every other factor that you work. If someone is only ever in a company that sends an email and they hate tools like Slack or Hangouts or whatever it is, then they're going to be less likely to want to do that. And they're going to send an email. So how do you enable those people to feel comfortable with the way that you do business, especially when you're as cutting edge as what Zapier is doing, and I think we're kind of somewhere in between with just being completely mixed and distributed.
Yeah. So two thoughts for me. Like, one, something that's the same, or we try to do the same, and other things that are different. I think the thing that has remained the same is I think this idea of hiring people and trying to find people, and this culture of ownership, as you mentioned. This idea that, you know, when you're small, if you don't do it, no one's going to do it. It's not going to get done. When you get to a couple hundred people, it's easier to have this attitude that, well, it's not my job. Or if I don't do it today, you know, maybe someone will get to it. And that's sort of, we are very much, even though we're a little bit larger now, we want to maintain that scrappy sort of startup mentality that, like, no, it's our job. We've got to do it. And so that very much is something that we're trying to preserve and keep as part of the core culture. Things that you have to evolve and shift and change is sort of, as you mentioned, I think, you know, as you get larger, one thing that we've noticed is because people don't know each other as well, you don't have those relationships of trust. And what happens then is it's easier to, you know, someone will say something and you will interpret it as critical of you or your team. And we try to emphasize this idea of, like, let's give each other the benefit of the doubt, right? Like let's assume that when someone is saying something that they have a reason for why they're doing it. They're not just out to try to, like, sabotage you or something like that. They have a good reason. And so, like, let's get together and talk about, you know, why that is and understand each other.
We have a very similar thing where we assume positive intent is like the default because it's so easy when there's a little bit of space for, especially text. Everything's text for us. I don't know how many people have read like that text message just like K. It's like, what's there's a little subtext. Yeah, yeah, well, a little subtext there. But it's just a natural thing. So we've done similar stuff where it's start with positive intent and then ask for clarification. Like, what do you mean? Oh, I was in a hurry. Sorry. Like, you could just get more clarity there. And when the default communication stance for us is text, those things pop up a lot. And surprisingly, a lot of starts of, like, maybe some sort of friction in a team is stemming from some sort of failure to communicate over that kind of medium. So it's a good point.
I think feedback cycles are really important there too, right? Like if you're unwilling to accept or give feedback, then you end up in those situations. Like I literally had a call this morning where one of my colleagues in the Netherlands was like, "Hey, I saw this message in Slack, and it seemed really weird and seemed off-putting." I was like, "Oh, well, this is." I use these words because we had actually had talked about this before, and I thought this was more in line with how you would expect this conversation, because I'm not an expert here, and so I'm saying I feel instead of I think or I believe. It's like because this is the way I see, I use the word I feeling. But, oh, okay, I understand. And that was just because he's not a native English speaker, and he interpreted it in a definitive versus that thing. And so if you are dealing with those kind of issues, and you're not willing to have a feedback culture, you end up getting a lot more friction than you deserve.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear kind of different elements of your work culture. I think that we also touched upon this idea of, productivity and how you work together, but I really want to dig deeper into understanding how you're able to just work as fast as possible. I think all three of you are in a space that's highly competitive. You're able to move really quickly, even as your companies have doubled in size in 2 years. So maybe you can all kind of give all of us some advice on how you're able to keep up with speed and get more work done in less time and empower your employees to do so. Karl, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So for me and for us, I think it starts with the people and hiring great people who can get a lot done, and then empowering them to do those things, because like if you try to hold on to everything, then you become sort of the bottleneck. And so for me, it's about hiring great people, but trusting those people, and that goes into the hiring part. Like I need to hire people who I trust are going to be better at that role and that job than I could ever be, right? And then let them run with it and have the autonomy. And then obviously empowering people with the right tools and access and transparency that they need to be able to make good decisions.
I think for us, right, especially for me, like if we focus on just what I do, right, I run IT, and so we're kind of the confluence between the everyday user and making their life as efficient as possible, and especially for us, security, right? So we try to empower all of our users to basically be as insecure as possible while still living within our security framework, because we know that not everyone comes in with this like threshold for friction and security that like I have, or some of our other employees do, because maybe they didn't come from a security background, right? They're not used to using two-factor, they're not used to using MDM checks and things that are looking at updating their devices. So we try to make everything as encouraging and easy as possible. And then when we look at what our users are doing, if I set up this route that goes from point A to point B to point C, and they find out a way to jump from point A to point C without that middle security step, I don't try to force them into that middle step. I try to figure out how to bring that step more in line with what they're doing. And I think for us, that allows people to work faster while still being secure. And we also rely a lot on tools and automation. So on the IT side, that's a lot of our identity management and pulling stuff from our HR tools into our identity tools and pushing all that identity information to as many applications as possible so that we can use those in those applications so they can be efficient. And then on the employee side, that's using tools like Zapier so that our finance team can take stuff from a Google Sheet and put it into Slack, and then also send out emails without ever having to contact IT or engineering to be able to do that.
Yeah, this is like my favorite question and topic, because we're huge productivity and automation nerds. I mean, one of our values is even don't be a robot, build a robot. And we do this through dog fooding our own product. Like, we want to make people more productive in the workspace, so everyone's using Zapier to do all kinds of crazy stuff. There's bots running around reminding people of doing stuff. Every now and then they've gone haywire and flooded rooms, and there's storied examples of that in our history. But the cool thing is people are able to just operate and automate parts of their work in ways that you don't have to wait for, let's say, an engineering counterpart to build something for you, to look into something for you. You can kind of go in and tweak it and copy it and expand on it or collaborate on it and start to do really interesting stuff. A lot of times for us, we just have spreadsheets set around, and we have rules set up that whenever someone changes this no to a yes, go do over here, ask this question in Slack. If you get this response, update. There's all these crazy, interesting things going on, and they're all just. It'll be just like some of the support team says hey, we need this. This would be a much better way to go about it. And instead of trying to convince everyone to build it or rally around it to get some support to build it, they just kind of spike it out and make it happen and throw it into a room, and people start interacting, and then if it works, that good idea just kind of spreads. So for us, this is keeping people productive is really what we do. Building all these apps and all these automations is our key way to do that, and it's part dog food, but part just making us punch above our weight class, so to say.
Amazing. I love hearing about Zapier. Work automation is definitely your bread and butter. So I want to also touch upon how you are finding the right tools and systems like G Suite and others that are empowering you to set up your business, scale, and deal with all of these work culture challenges. So before we get started, I do want to pan the room and understand like which of us are using G Suite today. Like maybe you can raise your hands and let us know if you're currently using G Suite at your company. So pretty much everyone, but I think it's important to understand how you're choosing these tools and systems and being smart about understanding what's your current state of work and what your business will need 5 years down the road. Zander, I think you know quite a lot about this, so maybe you can touch on it.
Yeah, so at any given point, I'm probably looking at evaluating or negotiating 5 to 7 SaaS applications. So when we do that, it's going one of a bunch of ways. Either we're bringing something to a department and say, hey, when we watch you work, we see that this is inefficient. And I did the Liberty and did some research, and there's like a couple of applications that we could look at. And then we start evaluating those with the team. And frequently, because they're the subject matter experts that go, oh, okay, yeah, this tool is awful, this tool is way too expensive, but we've been wanting to ask about this tool maybe like in Q3, but we've been kind of afraid to do it. And so that way it brings it up. And then we have the other side where people bring us tools and they really like it. Or because, again, we're a security company, occasionally we have like a compliance or security need that we now need to enshroud whatever this thing is into an actual process. And frequently those processes can be done very easily with tools that we buy or existing tools. So when we're looking at things, we try to find out tools that we can spend a good amount of money on. Like it's kind of like you don't want to buy the cheapest shoes because you have to keep rebuying them. You don't want to buy the cheapest app because frequently you're just going to have to replace it with another application just in 6 months or a year or 2 years. And migration is very expensive in a lot of ways. Yeah. So we want to find applications that work well, that are extensible. And for us, the big thing is they care about security. And so the number one thing I hammer my vendors about is that if they don't seem to care about security, we can't use them because we are now like, our biggest fear as a company is if and no offense to you guys, but if either of your companies get pops and all your data gets breached, you lose customers, and you guys lose valuation, but your customers will probably be fine. If we get popped and we get hacked, not only does that affect our bottom line, but we have the implication of tanking your companies too. And so when we're looking at vendors that we use, they have to care about security because we're trusting them with some level of access. So what their priorities are and what they care about is very important. But also, like, how many features are we getting out of this? And can those features roll out to more than just the department that asked? Can we increase the productivity of more than just this one team, but others? So we're looking at a tool that helps with flights internally. And it goes, oh, this is really great for our HR team and our recruiting team to bring in candidates, but it's also great for our marketing team to push out flights for all these events that we do. And they've been really complaining about not being able to track where all these different attendees are for all these different events, both internal and external. Well, now they can do that in this tool, and it saves them 20 hours a month, and it actually saves us money, and it means that we make less mistakes. So we're constantly looking at how much juice can we squeeze from every one of these SaaS oranges.
Right.
Okay.
Love the analogy. Yeah. Bryan, what about you as a CTO? I'm sure that's also something on top of mind for you.
Yeah, we kind of have like a little cheat in that we connect with so many apps, and so all the best in breed apps are connecting through Zapier. Since we're like a platform, we have like 1,400 or 1,500 apps. So we see guide into the usage and which ones are up and coming. Like we saw Slack go whoa up like that. So we were like, hey, we should check that out and start using it. So we're really lucky that we kind of get some of that insight, and we publish it every year with like our recaps. So that actually gives us a ton of opportunity to use the best in breed different specialty apps. And because they integrate with Zapier, we get to play with them, and our customers, everybody does support at Zapier, so everyone's interacting with the customers and suggesting it and being a part of that story. So it's really, really fun as just a part of how we operate. But I gotta say, like, a large number of our apps are discovered through that means. What are our customers doing? What are our partners? That sort of experience.
Really interesting. And kind of to round off this discussion, Karl, I know you actually wrote last year, I think in Forbes, about how choosing the right systems for your employees actually fosters creativity in some ways. Can you maybe share a little bit more about your thoughts on choosing systems that maybe encourage your employees to work better and more and in a happier way.
Sure. Yeah, maybe I'll step back a bit and give a background there. So first, echo what these guys said, and the future is there is a lot more that will be and is being automated, right? Like no one wants to be a robot at the end of the day, right? You mentioned the article, but we were reading, and the World Economic Forum puts out this paper or study every year, and they talk about like what are the important skills that are important for the workplace and for employers going forward. And you look at it, and the top 3 things now are basically like complex problem solving and critical thinking and creativity. And it makes sense because those are the things that are going to be awfully hard to automate, right? Like, so we think the more mundane things that are repeatable will over time get automated sooner rather than later. But where you will be able to add value, where we can add value, where our employees will add value is being able to solve those hard problems. And so that's why we're building the products that we are at Lucidchart. So this is a little plug. But our idea is as things get more complex, you need to really be able to think about it and understand better so that you can innovate faster. And so that's our goal and mission as a company, is to bring together a visualization of data with diagrams so that you can see complexity, whether it's a complex system or a complex process, and really understand it for yourself or be able to communicate that to others. And then that way you can work together to like improve it or fix the problem or do whatever it is that might be. And so that's what we're constantly looking for, is better ways to allow people to leverage, that aspect of themselves and their job to become more effective.
Awesome. Well, it looks like before we open up for Q&A, so get that question ready in your mind. Maybe we'll end with one last question, which is, what's your favorite Master Ninja G Suite tip for our whole audience? Maybe we'll go left to right, starting with Bryan.
Oh, man.
That's hard. There's so many.
There's so many. I mean, the way we use G Suite is probably a lot different than other folks. For example, we don't use a lot of email internally. We do that all over chat apps. So email is usually something that's kind of external facing. So oftentimes we'll be capturing emails and piping them into some sort of a room so we can operate on them. Or we're using, again, Sheets to manage some sort of workflow so we can drop something in almost as like an approval queue. So it gets dropped in. There's like a flag that after a human gives it okay, that seems legit, can flip it, and then it continues on its pipeline to go complete something else. Those are generally, if you're talking about the most trafficked, like high value things that we get out of like G Suite, it's always like a component of something else that is like greater than its sum of its parts. So if I think of like the biggest things that I can do with G Suite, it's always like fundamental building blocks to an entire like process or an entire like workflow that we're doing.
I'm trying to think about like all these really cool things that I do on a back end, but if I have to be honest, it's the Find a Time tool in Google Calendar. I live in Calendar. Like, my calendar is deeply abused by my coworkers. They flood it with, like, I literally woke up and had 3 more meetings than when I went to sleep just before this morning. But it's the ability to quickly suss out and find when is a good time for me to meet with 5 different colleagues all at the same time. And I'm constantly doing these, okay, well, I've got to meet with the 3 different execs from 3 different departments, plus they each want like 2 different representatives from each one of their departments, and I need to find a time that works for all of them. And so that being able to like create an event and click on Find a Time is something that every time I show it, and it's literally become part of our onboarding, people go, oh, I didn't know you could do that. I've been using G Suite for however many millions of years. And then I show them they have no idea that existed, and it's like I don't know how I could operate without it.
Yeah, and I'm going to cheat here because unfortunately I do deal with a lot of email, and part of that is external, but a lot of that is internal too. And so this idea of like, allowing email to be delegated and allowing like my assistant to be able to go through and look at those and take care of a lot of things for me, that's sort of my saving grace. So that's cheating there.